All right, so this will be our Chapter 5 lecture to go with the notes that you have previously been given. So we're going to do this like we do in class, and I'm just going to try to be myself, although I'd much rather be looking at your faces. So with Chapter 5 on self-concept and self-esteem, first let's talk about those first bullet points on your page 1. So knowing who we are is definitely going to affect our communication. We looked at this in Chapter 1 when we looked at the idea of our personal environment. Everything of who we are it becomes a filter or a lens through which we see the world. And obviously this also, as we've talked about previously, affects how we communicate with other people. We determine how we experience the world based on our experiences in our personal environment. Now, certainly too, as we've discussed with personal environment, this also includes not only, say, things like your upbringing and all the experiences with other relationships you've had and that sort of thing, but also all of the different social groups that you belong to, and all of your experiences, no matter what they are, up to this time. It also includes things like heredity. Those genetic factors play a part in how we see ourselves as well, and how we think others see us. So what are self-concept and self-esteem? This is on page 77 in your book. Our self-concept is who we think we are, right? It's our self-identity. It's what we believe to be true about ourselves, all right? It's what we believe to be true about ourselves, all the things that make up who we are. Self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves, how we value ourselves. So while self-concept looks at how we see ourselves, how we believe we are seen in the world, what we believe is true about ourselves, all right? Self-esteem is how we feel about those things about ourselves. How do we value ourselves, no matter what our experiences are, no matter what kind of background you come from, you know, again, upbringing, educational experiences, everything, relationships that you have had or have, right? It's also how you feel about those things and how you value yourself, because we've established already, right? Everybody has equal value. All right, so we also look at perceived self, and perceived self is a reflection of the self-concept. It's the person that you believe yourself to be in moments of honest self-examination. And these are the things about ourselves that we are unlikely to reveal to another person. So this is where it's a little bit different, our perceived self, than self-concept. Self-concept and who we think we are and what we believe to be true also comes from messages that we receive from other people. From the very early days, we learn who we are from other people, from their messages and their feedback. So the last self that we discuss here is presenting self. And this is the face that we present to other people, that we present to others. And it's the way we want other people to see us. So this is, again, where we're going to hide a few more things about ourselves. And again, this depends on the relationship and the context in the given communication situation. So what this means is, too, that if, let's say, a married couple or even good friends were at a party, and at that party, one person tells something about you, your partner tells something about you that damages your presenting self. Now, we are definitely going to go on the defensive if that happens. We don't like our public self, our presenting self, or our face, as we say, to be threatened. So that can cause real damage to a relationship. So we want to keep that in mind too. How's our self-concept formed? Again, this starts on page 78. We are affected by a great variety of people. And yes, obviously your parents. And you don't get to choose your parents. You don't have a say over that situation. So they're definitely going to have a huge effect on us. And we may get positive messages, we may get negative messages. I would dare to say that we all get a mix of both of those things, no matter who we are, no matter how great the parents are, because people are not perfect. And so everybody's going to have some negative experience. But I mean, think about, again, if you've been in a situation where you've had some very painful experiences with parents, even something like abuse, and you know, we cannot diminish those experiences. We cannot say that they are less than what they are. They have a huge impact on our self concept and our self-esteem. So what we want to realize too, as we talk about this, is that the self-concept, importantly, okay, is extremely stable. In other words, it's basically, it resists change. It resists change. And one term that's not on here, but I won't hold you to knowing it, is called cognitive conservatism. And cognitive conservatism means that we're going to hold on to how we see ourselves, even if it's negative, and even if something says, no, you're really not that. And so whatever kind of experiences that we've had and how we've learned to view ourselves, it can resist change. And that's important to know about a self-concept. It does resist change. There are times when we need to and we want to change it. So because of that, we need to be able to change and to change that self-concept. But it's going to take time and attention and a concerted effort. But it can be done, and that's important to realize. And I think I've shared some examples of my family. For example, my mother, who grew up very poor, and she had just an 8th grade education, not because of a choice of hers. She ended up having to work and to get their family through. And she lived in a very difficult environment, not so much with her mother, but with her father. It was not as far as what some people have experienced, but certainly it was challenging. Yet she has overcome all of those things and have put those experiences in a different place to share, to teach, to say you can overcome, because you can. You can, right? Because we all have choices every day, even though it might be tough, right? Even though it might be tough. All right, so let's look at some of these other, besides parents, who also influence and help us develop our self-esteem. So one of those are other authority figures, and some of those that we often think about would be people such as teachers, or maybe even principals and coaches. Those sorts of roles in our lives have a great deal to do with that. And I shared a note already with some classes, but I'll share this about my kindergarten teacher, that she really scared me. My first educational experience was kind of frightening. I was very shy, very introverted, and we had just moved into this new neighborhood, so I didn't have any of my old friends yet, but I was still very young. So when I first started, there were a few things that happened, and I do think they did affect me for a while. And that because I was shy, so remember that. And also, I'm not a person where organization comes easily to me. I'm kind of all over the place. I'm usually working on multiple projects at a time. I've learned a lot over time how to manage that, although it can still kind of come back at me, because that's part of my personality. So, you know, I mean, I'm the kid that was always looking for the other shoe, right? Or now it's probably keys, but I'm much better about it, but still it can happen. But yeah, I was the kid doing that. So I want you to keep those things in mind as sort of a context. So again, what happened, this teacher, and this was about the time Wizard of Oz was out, and this teacher, she reminded me of the Wicked Witch of the West. That's how I thought of her. She wasn't green, but everything else, that's how I saw her. That's how I perceived her to be. We had those big fat crayons in a box, and they had to be in a specific order at the end of the day in a specific spot in our cubby hole. every single day that we were in class. And I still remember the order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, brown, black. So that, because I can still remember it, I know it must have had a significant effect on me. And it seems small, but I want us to realize that those small things can matter. I mean, this is a kid who, was constantly worried about losing shoes and not keeping up with things and that sort of thing. And so I imagine I was frightened. I always made sure they were there, so I don't know what would have happened if they weren't. There was also an incident where I probably was standing at her desk, right? Kind of just staring, like a kid might do, just staring at her, like that, just not saying a word. So I probably was doing that. And wanting to say something, I don't remember what it was, probably to ask about something. But she was stapling these papers, so like this, staple. And she finally, I'm sure she was probably aggravated because I was standing there staring at her, but she finally said, "You better watch out or I'm going to staple your fingers." Well, so that's how I perceived it anyway. It might not have been that way in reality. So that was another thing. And then there was 2 other little things that year. And again, this is kindergarten, so and one was we had Valentine's, of course, Valentine's Day. And then they didn't send out a letter to, like the schools do today, saying, "Here's all the students, make sure you send a Valentine for each one of these people." They just didn't do that then. And so we decorated these paper bags, and I was really happy and kind of excited about it. And we put them all on the bulletin board. And at the end of the day, everyone was supposed to collect their Valentines, and I didn't get any. So it was upsetting, I remember. I just think I kind of tucked it away, though, like we do a lot of things. We tuck it away and we just let it kind of sit there, which isn't always helpful. We just need to realize those things affect us. And then another thing was something very simple that happened that made me feel kind of different than everybody else. And when you feel different than everybody else, it's kind of isolating. You wonder if there's something wrong, and you wonder why you're different. And so, and it was, again, kind of a small thing, but in kindergarten is where it affected me the most. And the teacher, we would get in a circle and play certain kinds of games, like Duck, Duck, Goose or things like that. And so we were doing some kind of a game, and we were supposed to sit, we used to call it, quote, Indian style, end quote. They call it crisscross applesauce now, as a politically correct term. So anyway, so I couldn't sit that way. I mean, my joints will not do that. They still won't do that. They didn't do it then. They never have done it. I can't do it. My legs will not, my knees will not go down. I cannot fold it so that everybody sits there. It's just, it was amazing to me that people could do this, because I could not do it. And if I tried to smash myself, it was very painful, my joints simply. And I found out years later that has to do with how I was formed in the womb and all of this. So it's just one of those joint issues that I couldn't do. So these are little things, but we've all had some teachers, probably, I hope you don't, maybe you haven't had any, that may have affected our self-concept in some ways in those early years especially. But, that fades over time. So it does get better, and it's more about picking yourself up and keep going, and not always believing those things, right? Not always believing those things. People tell you, hey, you can't go to college. You can't do that because you're this and this and this, and they're just not able to do that. And, we need to know what to do with that, right? In a positive sense. All right. So, we also compare ourselves socially to other people or other referent groups, like celebrities, for example. Some people are very concerned about what celebrities do and how they could look like a celebrity, how they can look this way and appear this way, or how do people behave in certain social groups. Someone who's in this particular group acts a certain way, right? So, I mean, you could even look at political affiliations, or if you're more conservative or you're more liberal, do you behave a certain way? So, and again, we know those are not necessarily accurate for ourselves as unique individuals, but we do compare ourselves socially, and sometimes that does cause us problems, and we're going to talk about that. Gender expectations is listed there, and I know that you've had a lot of information on this over the years, recent years, but it really does go back to the idea of, does someone who is more feminine behave a certain way, or more masculine behave a certain way, or female or male, etc., and what that means to you. That is influenced by your environment, that is influenced by your belief system, your educational experiences, and how your family views these roles and expectations. So that's a big part of it. When I grew up, again, you know, it was very traditional, and you know, the boys did the, I don't know, yard work and anything involving tools, and the girls did sewing and house cleaning, that sort of thing. And it was really pretty divided that way. There were some things that we all did. Now later, that did kind of come to haunt me when I became a single parent with 2 young children and going to college, pretty poor. And, you know, I had to learn a lot of things about, you know, how to use tools and how to, so it would have been beneficial to know those, but I don't blame anybody. It's just the way my family functioned, and that's okay. It's just a matter of, what do you do with it, right? What do you do with it? That's the question to ask yourself. All right. Cultural influences as well. All of those things that make up a culture or a co-culture can affect the way we view ourselves and how we function within that particular culture. We've talked about different types of cultures before from the beginning of the semester. But we do get, so self-esteem messages too come from these places. You know, your value, like if you have a certain political view, religious view, spiritual view, certain way of thinking, even, you know, different, you can think of different scenarios. But if you have those that some people may view you, since you're not part of their group, as less than somehow, which we don't need to do that. But if they do that, then that can affect your self-esteem. It's more a matter of, again, what do you do with that? Okay. All right. So when we get into criticism later, we'll be able to get further into some of these ideas of how to separate constructive criticism from something that's just meant to wound. All right. So some additional terms here: ego boosters and busters are pretty obvious. If you praise someone honestly and you give them, you know, good feedback that's encouraging, that's a booster. If you give them something purposely to hurt them, then that's a buster. We're not talking about constructive criticism here. We're talking about, did you say something deliberately to tear somebody down, to demean them, to belittle them? Okay, so we can give those out and we can receive those. So we need to think about that as communicators. Now, if someone's given an ego buster, we need to kind of put it where it belongs, and that it doesn't, even though it hurt, that it doesn't have any credibility for you. All right, an additional term there is reflected appraisal, and that's a process of how each of us develops that self-concept that reflects the way we believe others see us. So what we do is we start to conform to how we think others are looking at us. You know, they look at us a certain way. So, I mean, I can think about ways, again, that my self-concept is affected just by age, for example, and how, since I've been here almost 30 years, how that has you know, changed, altered, because, you know, there's certain ways I could dress, for example, that people would say, okay, now that is just wrong. Do not wear that at your age, right? I mean, we've heard comments like this about people before. But So I'm going to have a tendency, we all have a tendency to try to fit that reflected appraisal, how we think people see us, and to fulfill that to a certain degree. Okay. All right. So in the note we have down here below, from looking out, looking in, under reflected appraisal, right, it means that we're likely to feel less valuable, lovable, capable to the degree, right, that others have communicated ego-busting signals, and we'll probably feel good about ourselves to the degree that people affirm our values. And so, and we've kind of talked about this before, that there's a climate in overall, when you look at the media, okay, and that's limited, because you also need to look at your own community and how that is different than what's represented in multimedia now, in those different platforms, because it's not necessarily accurate, right? But you know, there may be a lot of ego busters that are really from people who don't even really know you. It's easy for people to tear you down online than it is in person. So, all right. So a few characteristics of the self, some of which I've kind of mentioned already at the bottom of page 1. Characteristics of the self and communication with the self. All right, page 85 to 88 in your book. Self-concept and self-esteem are not static. They are fluid, okay? So they can change, in other words. But self-concept, though, is resistant to change. And this is where that idea of cognitive conservatism comes in, is that we have a tendency to not let go of the past. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, I've never been good in English, I've never been good at writing, and I've always suffered through that, and then you get in college and you actually are learning and you write this wonderful essay and the teacher gives you all this feedback and you still don't believe that you're any good at it, then that's cognitive conservatism. And that's what you have to let go of and say, well, I don't know, maybe I am learning something. Maybe I am improving and getting better and understanding some things that I didn't used to understand. Right? Okay. So, self-concept is more resistant, but self-esteem, again, you can go throughout your day, you know, and maybe you get, you know, you go to one class, you get a test back, you got an A, and you're soaring high, and then you get another one, and you get a D, and you're going down again, and it affects your self-esteem. You get some kind of criticism at work, and even if it's something that's true, your self-esteem could still kind of go down. It just depends on you, and how you process it. But it's the idea is that it is fluid. Self-esteem can change even just throughout a particular day. All right. Self-fulfilling prophecy, you've probably heard of before, and there's a couple of ways this can happen. All right. So a self-fulfilling prophecy can be either self-imposed or other-imposed. It can also be positive or negative. So you put those four together. So in other words, you can say self-imposed negative self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Or a self-imposed positive self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's take that famous story of the little engine that needs to go up the big hill. And I'm sure you probably heard that as a child, but if not, right, you had this train and he just didn't think he was going to be able to make it up this hill. And he just kept, you know, failing at it because he kept saying, I just can't do it. I can't do it, which is a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. But when he starts saying, I think I can, while he is working his way up the hill, right? That's a self-imposed positive self-fulfilling prophecy. So this can work negatively or positively. So again, does it mean, oh, I'm struggling with math, and you just say, oh, I know I can do it without actually working at it? Well, that's not going to change anything. But if you work at it, get the help that you need to understand it, extra tutoring, whatever you have to have, if you do that and you say, I think I can, then you will, and you have to believe what you're saying. You have to believe it. So it's belief in these self-fulfilling prophecies that makes the difference. So if you believe a negative one, that's what's going to happen. If you believe a positive one, that's what's going to happen, because it's going to drive you to work at it and to figure out the strategies to get there. All right. Now, other imposed can be also positive or negative. right? If someone, again, comes to you and says, oh, yeah, you're not going to be able to make it through college. You can't make it through college. Now, if you believe that, then you most likely you won't make it through. That's where the problem comes in, is your belief in it. But what about a positive one? Now, there was a famous study done where these teachers were given groups of students, and they were told that the students were gifted students. The students actually were just randomly chosen and had average achievement in their classes to date. So, so the teachers went through their semester, their time of teaching, and when that was done, and they looked at the results, all of the students had improved immensely. Which means that the teachers had such high expectations of the students. They were imposing this self-fulfilling prophecy, a positive one. And so it tells us we have a great deal of influence over other people, but also that they have a lot of influence over us and how we look at ourselves. And if, depending how we look at ourselves can have so much to do, right, with how successful we are in our relationships, how successful we are, at work, at school, etc., right? Okay. So this self-image has that direct impact on communication. If you're not valuing yourself, if your self-esteem is low, that's going to affect your communication and that negatively, and that's going to affect your relationship negatively if that happens. And same thing with our self-concept. If we limit ourselves and say, well, I can't do that, that could also have a negative impact on not just ourselves, but our relationships as well. All right. So with a true understanding of ourselves, looking back at my experience in kindergarten, right? I mean, I can see certain ways that it shaped me negatively in the short term, but then I also know how I view it later, and realize what those experiences actually mean at this point, right? And how so it's really about that. Okay. All right. So, let's go on to this next section. This is the last section. And I'm going to do that. Well, I started to say we'll do it separately, but let's go ahead and do it in one in case we have some issues with two videos. All right, so this is the one that you'll use the Chapter 5 learning activity on. This is what we usually do with Plickers, but we're not going to do that as a Plickers. I did write them more in a similar way to test questions instead of the more abbreviated forms where we do a lot of discussion in class. So, and you'll be able to take that twice. It will randomize questions each time, and it will randomize the answers each time. So pay attention to that and do some thinking on it. You will get some feedback like I did with Chapter 4 exercise, but I'm gonna try it a little bit different. After people complete their survey, I'll know better what we'll do. All right. So, and you have until Wednesday to get that finished, 10 p.m. Central Time. All right. So, now I want to talk about how these distortions, and I also want to say, I use the word inaccurate because I think that's going to help you more, because distorted actually is used as in a specific way, as one of the 4 types of inaccurate feedback that you can get that can affect your self-concept and self-esteem. So we can, again, view ourselves either sometimes too positively or too negatively, right? If it's positive, it can create an inflated self, and you're not really seeing that, hey, I do need to improve in a certain area. So you tend to be blind or have blinders on. If you have an overly positive messages that inflates your sense of self in certain areas, negative distorted feedback, okay, when is causes you to see yourself more harshly than you should. So that can also be a problem. But let's look at these 4 right types, because this is what you're going to be choosing from in the examples in the Chapter 5 learning activity on inaccurate feedback. right, so the first one is obsolete information. And the key word here is obsolete. Obsolete means it's outdated. It means it's no longer applies. So you shouldn't be using that as a measurement or as a way of viewing yourself. You know, whether that's, again, given to you by somebody else as a message, or whether it's intrapersonal and you're talking to yourself about it. So the effects of past failures, right, can deeply affect us, right? But those past events do not predict the future. They don't. They don't predict up to you right now and every moment from this point on, right, that you choose. You always have that choice to not pay attention to the things from the past. So, but those past failures, we can be too harsh on ourselves, right? We do negative on ourselves. So we can look at this as it's obsolete, it's outdated. I'm not that I'm not that kindergartner anymore, right? So it would be obsolete information for me to judge my interactions with other people in a classroom, let's say, going by my kindergarten experience. That would be absurd. All right, so it doesn't predict successes either. So just because you've been wonderfully successful somewhere else doesn't guarantee that you're going to be successful in the future. So, for example, I know that when I went to undergraduate college, and I was successful there. And then I went to my graduate school for my master's degree. And I had to say, oh, wait, this is different. This is different. I have to prove myself again, right? Just because I was successful in undergrad doesn't not make me a successful graduate student, right? And then as I worked, further on studies beyond my master's, the same issue. So we just because we've done well in something in the past does not mean, right, that it predicts success or success in the future. We have to work at it. We have to realize these are new experiences. I do remember in graduate school at Murray, working on my organizational communication with an emphasis in theater degree. That's a long title, I know. I had this one class, and I always, again, I expected to do well, right? But it doesn't mean I didn't have hurdles, though. And I did run up into this one obstacle with a research methodology class, that had statistics in it. And I had never had statistics. And I was in grad school, you have to have an A or a B, and I had a C at midterm because of the tests that I took. It was so hard for me, and it was one of those experiences where I did learn that if you don't ask questions, it's expected that you understand. And so I just took a short time with the instructor for me to finally understand what I was supposed to be doing. But again, I just didn't expect to have that roadblock. So I had to say, wow, I'm going to have to do something different this time. All right. I'm going to have to go talk to the instructor and actually ask for some help. And that's always a good thing to do when you don't understand something. Okay. All right. Distorted feedback are remarks of overly critical, right, parents, cruel friends. So these are going to be a lot of ego busters, uncaring teachers, excessively demanding employers, right? Somebody who's really just giving you too much that you cannot possibly get that done. Or even memorable strangers that you run into. Hopefully you're not having any of those experiences currently with what's kind of happening. But, it's... let's see. Oh, I'll do that in class too. Again, you cannot. So that can be. In other words, they're sort of unrealistically negative. They're over the top, as we would say. They're way too excessive. Okay, or you can have excessively positive messages, and this is what we were talking about earlier: positive and negative. That distortions here. So this is the one that's actually called distorted feedback, and that is where it's overly critical or overly positive. If you're overly positive, how do you improve, right? If everybody gets a trophy, how do you know when someone excels, right? So, I mean, that's something that was a problem for quite a number of years. So we need honest feedback. We need honest feedback. That's what we need to have a healthy self-concept and self-esteem. So it can go in either direction. All right, perfectionism has to do with, specifically in this case, where that we're exposed to different kinds of people, such as models or celebrities, or other people, that there's some kind of perfect person out there. So, for example, that there's a perfect student out there. There's a perfect student who's able to do everything just perfectly well, manage their life, balance everything, and be able to do everything and not even break a sweat. So, that this is a perfect person, the perfect student, that they're able to achieve all A's and be involved in many things and have a family life and all the, so on. And there's a perfect teacher, that there's a perfect teacher out there who's able to do all this without breaking a sweat, without running into problems, or even just being, human. So, it doesn't exist, okay? There is no such thing as a perfect student, a perfect teacher, a perfect parent, a perfect child, a perfect in any kind of role that you can imagine, a perfect, right, president of the United States, a perfect whatever. Nobody's perfect, okay? We're all human. We're all equal in that sense, okay? We have different strengths, we have different weaknesses, but we are definitely not, any of us, perfect. Nobody is perfect. So we need to realize that about ourselves. But we do have a tendency, again, to look at, I was looking at this, and this will have to do with fallacies later too, and emotions, but I was looking, through different websites, as we browse around, and I saw this one article about, how to work remotely at home, and right, do it well. And it showed this guy, sitting in this perfectly clean, okay, it was kind of like a kitchen to a dining area, and sitting there with his laptop, wearing a very beautiful, soft, but, not like rigid looking, but a white shirt, a very, and it was white walls and white curtains flowing in the wind. Everything was clean and white and bright, and he looked very relaxed while he sat there looking at his computer. And I thought, yeah, I'm supposed to be that. I'm supposed to be that. No, I was supposed to be that. That was a picture of perfection that doesn't exist. I'm sure while you're at home, that this doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, and it's okay that it doesn't exist. But we can get ourselves into some real, it affects our self-esteem. It can, and the way we see ourselves, the way we value ourselves. It can affect those things if we let them. All right. It's better to remember that we do have faults. It's not true that a well-adjusted, successful person has no faults. We all have faults, okay? And we're never going to be perfect, okay? All right, so social expectations. Do not go by your own definition of social expectations, all right? Don't go by that. What you want to do is, for this set of questions, all right, when we talk about social expectations, we're specifically looking at how society, right, the social expectation is that we should be able to be that perfect person, right? See, society tells us there is a perfect person out there. There's a perfect mother, a perfect father, a perfect teacher, a perfect student. There are perfect people, and that you're supposed to get there. That's what you're supposed to go for. And you're not going to be successful until you get to that perfection that we talked about. So society tells us that. However, society also says if you are successful, all right, that you are not supposed to talk about it. That if you do talk about it, that you're a braggart, you're conceited, all right? So it's not okay to pat yourself on the back, right? So it is okay. Now, obviously, if you constantly talk about yourself and, that's more narcissistic, which we talked about earlier, if you're always saying I, and being a conversational narcissist or a stage hog, that's not what we're talking about. We're saying, if someone gives us praise, that's okay. And it's okay to say, well, I did well on that particular thing. That was something that I worked very hard and I was able to get that done. You can also admit to those other things that this is something that I do have to work on over here, right? So it needs to be balanced, it needs to be honest when we look at ourselves, right? And we think about what other people say to us or about us, right? Okay, so I'm going to leave that at that right now. And I'm going to let you work on your exercise. Thank you. See you soon.